Before I get started, I actually want to have a little bit of information about you. How many of you are what I would call agile professionals? You're not developers, you're a coach, or you're a scrum master, or something like that. Okay. How many of you work in consultancies instead of in a full-time role? Okay, okay, good. This is important for me to know for my talk. This talk, what does good agile look like? It's a pretty open question, I think. And I actually started writing this talk about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. And I was writing it because of, I had joined, as you heard, I had joined, I'd come from Spotify, Adobe, before that, both companies that had very good agile practices. And I'd been doing that for 12 years, and I'd gotten very comfortable in very nice agile environments. And I joined a company that was a little bit more challenged. And I thought, my problem in getting us to a better place is that I am not telling that story well enough. And so I was trying to figure out a way. I originally wrote this talk as a way of not just giving this talk, but being able to tell my own company, no, this is where we're trying to go. This is the vision I'm trying to bring you. So I tried to do that, and I gave this talk once, and it was horrible. It did not go well. I was not happy with it. And so I kind of put it on the shelf. But when I started talking about coming back, I thought, actually, I think I still want to do this. But also in the time since I first tried writing this talk, I started seeing a lot more of things like this. This is from the Register. That's a bad thing, because it's a very well-known site. And I'd see this, and I can understand, I worked in waterfall at Microsoft for years, and I can tell you, I don't like working in waterfall. I've done that. Do I hate waterfall? No, I just don't like it. When I see something like this, it's like, why do you hate? It's like you hate agile. You don't just dislike it. You just don't prefer to do something else. You really dislike it. And then you'd see things like this, where it's clear that somebody's just not getting the idea. Somebody doesn't quite understand what agile even is. And then I'd see things like this. And I'd go, well, wait a second. And if you read through the thread, you'd say, I hope most of you would say, the experience these people are having does not relate at all to my own experience. And that's kind of how I felt. I've done agile in very diverse teams very well. There's nothing about agile or Scrum that's anti-diversity. And I see these things, and I'd have to respond. Actually, if you look at those things, you'll see my comments there, because somebody's wrong, and I can't. And I'm not an agile zealot. I've worked agile now. I started working with extreme programming in 2000, and I've only worked agile since. So I've been doing it a long time, but I will be the first to tell you that if somebody comes up with something better than agile, I will switch to it. I'm not a zealot. I don't have a book or anything like that where I feel really invested. It just so happens that agile has always been the best way I've found to work, and so I continue to work that way. So it's not that I only care about agile, but when I see things where people just clearly don't understand it, and they're angry about it, they don't just dislike agile, they hate agile. My first thought is always, well, you must have been scared by an agile clown when you were a child or something. Like, I don't understand why you're so passionately against it. So over the last few years, and since I was writing this talk, like I said, I'd been coming from really high-performing agile environments. One, I joined a company that wasn't in that state. And two, I also started, I would get calls from friends who would be at a company, and they'd say, hey, next time you're in town, do you mind stopping by? We're having a lot of problems, and it'd be great to have somebody else to hear and give us advice. Or friends we'd Skype, and they'd say, I'm struggling with my team, and I'd visit companies. I don't consult. As you heard, I'm a CTO, a VP. But I would, visit a company, and I would just see these really, really broken agile processes. And I started to understand things a little bit better. And one of the things I started to understand is, when I started doing agile, which is way over that, off that chart, agile was this thing that was kind of created by developers for developers. It was really kind of slow growing. As I started in doing extreme programming in 2000 in a startup, and that startup went under, like most startups did in 2000. But afterwards, we'd all had such a great experience that everybody was trying to find another company that would let us do extreme programming, and there almost were none. And for a little while, I would kind of bring agile into any company I was in and kind of grow it, and it seemed like, well, nobody's doing agile, and then it seemed like everybody was doing agile, and I thought, oh, okay, now agile is we're all agreeing agile is the thing. That was actually somewhere around here. I was actually just lucky, I guess, in the people I was talking to. And then I would find out, no, most companies still aren't doing agile, and then I just assumed that up until somewhere here, where this is from the HP white paper, and now it's not 100%. It's 100% of the people they talk to, but it's not 100% in the industry, but it's pretty close now. Everyone's doing agile. Congratulations, we've won. That's great. But why are they doing agile? Why have companies adopted agile? Well, it's because of stuff like this, right? Everyone's being told you have to do agile now. Agile is the thing. It's going to give you all these benefits. Your hair is going to be more lustrous. Your product is going to be better. You're going to ship more frequently. Everybody's going to be happy. CEOs are reading this and they're saying, oh, I need some of this agile now. We have to be agile. I've been told that we have to be agile. If we're not agile, we're behind the times. And luckily, a lot of people have kind of stepped in to fill that gap. Over 6,000 books on agile in Amazon. Big multinational companies very happy to charge you several €100,000 for their 3-month, we're going to turn you agile package. I hope none of you are from this. I'm not making fun of you specifically, but this is kind of the thing. There's a lot of money to be made doing agile now. And the problem we have is there's also lots of certifications. Everyone can make their own certifications. There is no governing body of agile. There's no one that says, no, this is agile and this isn't agile. It's not like Lean Six Sigma or something like that. So anybody, I can, at the end of this, you will all be certified Kevin Agile practitioners, right? I can do that for you because no one can tell me I can't. So what I realized talking to companies, what I realized visiting companies, and what I realized kind of in my own company and talking to developers who'd learned agile at other companies was that agile, the way I had conceived of agile had really changed. Agile had been this, I like to think, because of my own history, I'd like to think of agile as this kind of punk thing, right? It was a bunch of developers reacting to sort of the corporate industrial way of building software. They wrote a manifesto, how punk is that, right? It was this thing, it became corporate. It is corporate now. This is where we're at. And that's a problem because, as I said, what is agile? Nobody knows. Nobody knows what agile is. You even heard in the opening, right? Well, this is what I think agile is. It's about inclusion. It's about building good teams. About happiness. No, it isn't. It is whatever you think it is, and it's hard to say otherwise. That's kind of the problem we have. It's the strength of agile, but it's when we've gotten to the point we're at now, it's also one of the weaknesses. So I can go into companies and sell my 300,000 euro, I'm going to make you agile package, and I can tell them that agile is fixed dates with fixed deliverables, minimum quality bars. I'm going to fix all three corners or all three sides of the triangle. And it means strict adherence to specification. And yeah, that's Agile, as far as you know, right? But it's a mindset. It's not a rule book. That's the way I see it. You can tell me I'm wrong, and you'd be right, because it's whatever we think it is. So this has come up as Agile's grown in popularity, and this is a problem. Because now, Agile used to be a thing a team would decide to embrace, or maybe a small company, and it would grow from there. Now, Agile is something leadership, like me, senior leadership, forces down into the company. I decided, or I was at my CEO club, and we were all smoking cigars, and the other CEOs were making fun of me because I hadn't done Agile yet, so I hired these people, we're going to be Agile now, right? That's happening, and it's being forced onto developers. It's being forced onto teams without their choice now. It's becoming something that they're forced to do. So in the version 1, last year's version 1 State of Agile report, the good news, actually, though, is successful Agile transformations as a percentage is increasing. The bad news is it's still not great. Between half and a third of all Agile transformations fail. And these are the reasons why. These are the top reasons why. And if you look at it, a lot of it is culture. Like, specifically, culture is the top one. And what does organizational culture mean? It means senior leadership is saying, we're going to be Agile now, but I need my accountability. So I need to know that dates are going to be met, and that feature agreements are going to be met, and all these things that kind of mess with your Agile. Or it's teams saying, yeah, we want to be Agile, and the organization saying, too bad, you don't get to be Agile. There's lots of reasons culturally around why it is. The resistance to change, that's a cultural phenomenon. Inadequate management, support, and sponsorship, that's culture. There's a lot of cultural reasons, and that's always been the case, right? Why Agile fails. But I used to be a very firm believer that you could do the Agile practices, you could adopt extreme programming, you could adopt Scrum, you could adopt Kanban, and then get good at doing it by the book, and the Agile culture would follow. I think I've realized, and a lot of you, you may have figured this out years ago, this is relatively new to me, that you actually can't do Agile without the culture piece. You have to do the culture piece. And in fact, I think you have to do the culture piece first. Because when you try and make people do Agile practices without a culture that supports it, you just make them angry. It creates really bad Agile. And I've seen this now in company after company. So how many of you are familiar with the Kubler-Ross change curve? All right, a lot of you. Good. For those of you that aren't, because there's several, it works like this. This is how people process change. The change is introduced, and at least at first it's kind of new, and it's kind of maybe exciting in some ways. And then you start doing it, and you realize, I don't understand how this works, and it's very frustrating to me. And then you kind of bottom out in what's called sometimes the valley of despair, where just nothing's working, everything's worse than it used to be. I'm unhappy, why did they make us do this? This is bad, bad, bad. If you persevere, you start figuring things out, and you start realizing, oh, okay, I know how to do this. And then eventually, hopefully, you get to the other side, and actually things are much better than they were before. What happens when the company is doing Agile because they think they're supposed to do Agile, and the team is being forced to do Agile, not by choice, but by management, you get to this point, and you don't want to persevere, you just end it. This is worse. Leadership is saying, not only do I not have my accountability, everyone's telling me I can't have my features on specific dates, but we're even slower than we used to be. The team is saying, I don't understand this. Why can't I use hours for my estimation? Why do I have to use these dumb points things? What does 3 points mean? I don't know. And the Scrum Master is making me do it, and this is stupid. And everyone says this is bad. And then either, if you're lucky, you go and say, forget it. We're going to go back to what we were doing before. what I've actually seen happen a lot is people just say, we're just going to, whatever, we're just going to stick here and just try and figure this out. And they end up actually just coasting along the valley of despair with this half agile, half whatever thing for a very, very long time. And what happens actually, I've seen, so I'm from Seattle, there's a very large telco company in Seattle. This company, every agile person, every agile professional I know in the Seattle area, and there's many, has worked at this company for 6 months at different times. And the reason is, every once in a while, this company says, of many tens of thousands of employees, says, we are going to be agile now. And they hire every agile person they can. They bring them in on a 6-month contract to do their big agile transformation. They spend 6 months, they get to the valley of despair, they say, forget it. They let all those people go, and they go back to what they were doing before. I know of 3 times they've done this, like every 2 years. Let's hire in all the agile coaches, let's bring them in, they'll spend 6 months beating their head against a wall, and then we'll fire them all, say this is bad, and then come back out, and then do it again in a few years. So if you're a developer here, and that's your experience with Agile, then you say, Agile doesn't work. We tried it. We tried Agile. Doesn't work at all. All these people who say Agile is good, they're wrong, because we did it, and it was horrible. And if you're a leader, you say, Agile's bad. It's this thing that they just made up, and nobody knows what it is, and it doesn't work, and we shouldn't do it. And this is a problem for all of us because we like Agile and we want to continue to work this way and we want it to be successful. So how do we overcome this? How do we overcome this problem we have now in the Agile community? Well, as I said, when I wrote this talk originally, I thought we need to be better storytellers, right? We need to figure out how to get people through the valley of despair to the other side. We have to give them the vision. And this was a real challenge for me because I'm not that good of a storyteller, right? We need to be better storytellers. I'd worked in these incredibly efficient, really high-performing Agile teams for years and years. And when I came to AVVO, and AVVO wasn't that case, that was fine. That was my goal. I'm going to show that we can become that. I didn't know how to explain that to my own team. No, it's going to be really good when we get to the other side. It's an abstraction. People don't understand it. Oh, well, we're going to be better. We're going to be faster. You're all going to be happier. This doesn't mean anything to us. I realize that storytelling isn't enough. This is where we're going to talk a little bit about transforming organizations. That's what I realized. I couldn't do it just by storytelling alone. I actually needed to change the culture before I was ever going to get us to a much better place with our Agile practices. So being that this is Agile by example, I'm going to give you my example. Oops. I'm going to give you my example. At AVVO. When I was here 2 years ago, I gave a different talk. That talk was called Building a Culture of Continuous Improvement at AVVO. I was 4 months into the company at that point, and I was really excited by the idea, not only just Agile, yeah, this is great. Agile's awesome, but Agile as a venue to turning the entire company into a continuous improvement engine, to me was much more interesting and much more exciting. And one of the things, this is a slide from that talk, one of the things I said 4 months into my tenure was, well, no, the good part in building this culture is that Agile's already in practice. And I think I said something along the lines of, well, and Agile practices, they need some work, but overall it's pretty good, right? It's a good starting place, but we just need a little improvement, but Agile's in place, so that helps a lot. I was wrong. I was totally wrong. I totally misread it. I was a CTO. I was attending, once in a while I'd attend a planning meeting. I was still coming up to speed. I would attend daily stand-ups sometimes. And not long after I gave the talk here, one of the product owners asked me to attend their retrospective. And she asked me to attend it because she was having a lot of problems with her team. And especially disagreeing about Agile stuff. And she said, well, you know Agile, Kevin. Can you come? And I said, yeah, of course. And so I attended the meeting. And then we were talking about one of the problems the team was having was stuff was getting stuck in the test. And it was getting hard to get things out because the test team was getting, or the tester in the team was getting kind of backed up. And during that, one of the developers said, well, testing's not agile. We don't need to do testing. And I said, and I was trying to just sit and observe. And I couldn't help myself. Well, what? Testing? What do you mean testing's not agile? Oh, no, testing's not agile. No, you don't test in agile. I'm like, of course you test in agile. Why would you think you don't test in agile? And this was, well, no, I've heard that many times, that testing's not agile. I said, yeah, no, it totally is. I've done testing, manual testing, plus test automation in agile teams for years and years. It absolutely is. No, I don't think it is. Again, there was no judge for us to go to. Like, I couldn't bring this person to the court of agile and have, I don't know, Ken Schwaber or somebody say, nope, testing is agile. Next case, right? I don't have that ability. So it was just a disagreement, and I would love to tell you I made a very forceful argument and convinced them, and then they were believed truly that testing was agile, but instead I said, I got to a point where I just got tired of the argument and said, we're doing testing. I'm the boss, so we're testing. Let's not, I don't want to argue about this anymore. A few minutes later, there was a new developer on the team, and she was saying, we don't really have very good documentation, and what I would love to do in like a sprint, the next sprint maybe, because it took me way too long to get started on the team, I'd just like to document some of the processes or some of the things to get started so that the next developer we hire has it. And the same developer said, well, documentation's not agile. I said, what? Well, documentation's not agile. And this time he had something to say. Well, it's in the Agile manifesto. We don't document. I said, that's not what it says. He said, no, it absolutely says documentation's not agile. I said, okay. What the Agile manifesto says is working software over comprehensive documentation. Comprehensive documentation. And it also says, while there's value in the items on the right, we prefer the items on the left more. That doesn't mean no documentation. That means we prefer working software over comprehensive documentation, right? So documentation is not un-agile. But to him, that means, no, we don't document. And again, there's no one to say. And unfortunately, and maybe to the point, the Agile Manifesto is very vague. So you can read that and say, we don't document, or you can read that and say, we document all the time. And you're both right. This is kind of the problem we have. So again, we went back and forth, and again, I said, too bad. We're gonna let this person write stories so that we don't have to waste a lot of time onboarding people. So this person now was he was just angry, and he wasn't gonna talk anymore. So then later, somebody was saying about how it was really hard reading some of the code, and maybe we should comment some more, and then different developer said code comments aren't agile. And eventually, I kind of got to the point where I realized that what I started to think I was hearing was developers had gotten into this place where they got to get out of jail free for anything they didn't want to do. Because they could just say, this thing I don't want to do, this isn't agile. And they could be right? Because who's going to argue with them? And at that point at AVVO, I realized we were doing agile, but we weren't agile. We weren't thinking in an agile way at all. Like, we were following the book, and we were kind of following the rules, but for Scrum, but we weren't agile thinking at all. We had a lot of these problems. I crossed out the ones I don't think we did have. The good news, though, was that we had a burning platform. So if you're unfamiliar with the burning platform, the idea is, well, you can't stay there. You have to go somewhere. And everyone agreed that things weren't working, right? So that was the good news, and I talked about this 2 years ago as well. People weren't saying, well, the way things are working now is good. They just couldn't agree about what was different, what wasn't working. The developers were blaming product was blaming UX was blaming development, somebody else was blaming the test team, and somebody probably blamed sales or marketing in there somewhere too. Everybody was pointing fingers, nobody could agree, but everyone agreed things weren't working at all. So I realized we had to do, we had the changes, people weren't going to fight the change, that the change was necessary. I realized that we needed to make changes not on one thing. I talked about culture, but it was culture, training, and tools. And I'll talk about a little bit about tools in a minute. Our tooling was also holding us back a lot. I'm going to talk real quick about how I approach culture change. I talked about this a little bit last time I was here, but my thinking has evolved a little bit, or I've just got a better metaphor, so I wanted to share that with you. Who gardens here? Okay, for those of you who don't garden, if you're planting a new garden, you find a piece of ground to put your garden in, you dig up the ground, you remove all the roots and the rocks so that there's soil for the plants to grow. You amend the soil, you put nutrients in, you plant your seeds, you water, you tend, and eventually you have a nice garden, right? But you don't, at the beginning, say, I'm going to have this rose right here, it's going to grow this tall, it's going to have 5 leaves, 6 thorns, and 20 petals. And it'll be exactly this color and smell exactly like this. That's this flower will be exactly this. You can't do that. You set up the environment, you create the right environment for the plants to grow, you put the seeds in the ground, and then whatever grows is the right thing for that environment. That is the way that I have found that culture change works well. I set up an environment for good things to happen. I give a little nudge for them to get started, and then I let the team create the culture instead of me creating a series of projects that instill a new culture. So that's what I tried to do at AVVO. I talked a little bit about what we were going to do. Now I'm going to tell you what we did, specifically around our Agile. Step 1, and this will be obvious to many of you, especially because you do this job, there was no Agile person in the company. Okay, so that's a good start. Let's hire an Agile coach. In the US, it's very common for these people to be on a contract, not to be full-time employees. I actually hired this person full-time because I wanted the company to know, no, we're actually serious about this. This isn't something we're playing at. I also wanted this person to know you're here for the long term, so dig in and think about not what you're going to do in the next few months, but what you're going to do over the next few years. I also needed a partner in crime, right? Because I knew I needed some help, but I also needed somebody who wasn't me, who could be in the teams. If the CTO shows up in your team meeting, you change how you talk. If one of your peers shows up, you kind of talk the same. I also wanted somebody to tell me that's a dumb idea. You don't know Agile as well as you think you do, Kevin. I wanted somebody like that, and I didn't have somebody like that at the time. So that was what, I think this is important to actually have these folks. Many of you do this job, so I would hope you would agree. The next thing we started was I wanted to bring in Agile thinking without calling it Agile, right? So if I come in and say, we're going to introduce all these new Agile processes, and we're going to talk about Agile, everyone goes, Agile. But instead, we just started bringing in stuff that was from Agile without calling it Agile. We're just going to do this thing. So it was little things. Ideas that come from Agile that aren't specifically Agile, but bring in different aspects of Agile thinking. I introduced lean coffee for some of our meetings. Oh, hey, we're not going to have an agenda. I have a way of building. There's a cool way of building an agenda, I know, and we're going to try that. We hadn't met the development org hadn't met ever. So we took a day, did an offsite, and instead of bringing a big full agenda in, we did an unconference. Just get them thinking about these things a little bit differently. For the senior leadership team, this was a big challenge. Most folks had read, 7 Habits or these kind of things in the senior leadership team, so they were familiar with ideas like limiting work in progress and prioritization, but they actually hadn't ever really had to do it. And they certainly hadn't had to do it together. So one of the things we did, I had the senior leadership team meet, and we each listed our top priorities, because each of us was limiting our own personal WIP, but we then we're all enforcing all of our ideas into the organization. The organization had 40 top priorities. So that wasn't going to work. So I actually made them build a backlog. I didn't call it a backlog. I didn't say anything about Agile. Just bring in this idea. Let's actually have a strict ordering and only do a certain number of things at a time. This is Agile thinking. I just didn't call it Agile. And they could see the value, and especially if it wasn't wrapped up into this other thing that they knew or didn't know. We started bringing in retrospectives. I talked a little bit about this last time as well, but this idea of just, well, we're not going to, we use the word retrospective, but it wasn't like an end of sprint thing. It was, hey, that project went really well. Instead of calling it a postmortem, let's do a retrospective and just look at what went well so that we can do that again, what we could do better next time. Or that project didn't go so well, but it'd be good to understand why so that we learn from that experience. We started doing retros. We started doing WIP limiting. We started doing prioritization. None of it was called Agile. All of it, obviously, you know, is Agile thinking. Another thing we had to change was how we talked about accountability, because we were definitely a company that had gotten into this habit of saying the feature on date is accountability. And that wasn't going to work in an Agile if we were going to embrace Agile. Well, there's a lot of this kind of stuff going around. I'm betting a lot of you have had this. If I don't know if the team says you're going to deliver these features on this date, and that's how you have accountability. You didn't deliver what you said you were going to deliver on this date. That works really poorly for Agile. So we moved to this other model where I worked with convincing people, well, do we want feature by date, or do we actually want to increase retention in our product? Do we want to increase conversion in our product? That's what we want. That's what's actually going to be right for the company. Let's give teams control of those levers and use that as the judge. So if the company is doing well, the teams are doing well. If the company's not doing well, okay. That's a better accountability because it actually reflects the company priorities versus these artificial deadlines that we use for creating accountability. That was a lot of work. Actually, let me restate. That wasn't a lot of work because for finance people, for marketing people, they live in those metrics. So they're like, oh yeah, okay. They could see it, or at least they were willing to try it. So now, rather than just get the dev team or the product development group kind of educated, because as I said, people really didn't, we thought we knew Agile, we didn't know Agile very well as an organization. So we needed to educate, but I didn't want to just educate the product development team, I wanted to educate the whole company. And I didn't want to turn everybody into doing Kanban or anything like that, but I didn't want it to be this thing that happened over here that nobody understood. I wanted everybody to understand what we were doing, and so that they could feel at least that they could participate. So, like many of you have done, if you're a trainer, we created an Intro to Agile class. We didn't do this wasn't a long thing, this was like an afternoon, and we really focused actually on making it fun, right? This is not Intro to Scrum, this is Intro to Agile, it's really fun. We build towers with spaghetti and marshmallows, stuff like that. The other thing that we did was we put this in the conference rooms, because this was our big conference rooms that would fit the teams, just happened to be next to the lunchroom, and they had big glass windows. So the entire company was sitting there eating lunch, and they'd see these people like laughing and playing with Legos and building towers out of spaghetti. I go, what's going on over there? What are they doing? Oh, this is an Agile 101 class, and sign-ups are open for anybody. We open the sign-ups to anyone in the company. And when people saw sort of this and they heard about it, they got really excited about it. And we ended up training about 250 people, like about 2/3 of the company, on Agile. Marketing, sales, HR, finance, everybody ended up doing this thing. And they really enjoyed it. And they came out of it not necessarily being Scrum practitioners, or anything like that, but they understood the concepts in Agile, they understood the language in Agile, everyone started talking about at least these ideas in the same way. And then for those who wanted to go forward, we started creating the other classes, the more advanced classes, specifically to make sure we at least had a baseline of practice. But that meant that when a developer was talking to a salesperson, and the salesperson said, you know, I really need this thing for a customer, and the developer said, well, I think we could probably do it in the next sprint. The salesperson go, oh, okay, cool. As opposed to, what's a sprint? I don't know, I need this now. They understood what we were talking about, and that helped a lot. Tooling was very important for us, partially because I have a very firm belief that if you want to bring value to customers, if you want to iterate, you actually have to ship sometimes. That helps, and we were having a real problem with that. As a company, it was taking us up to a full day or multiple days to deploy because of our old infrastructure and our old architecture. And it's hard to convince people that you should ship often when shipping can take days. They just didn't want to do it, so we'd gang up big masses of features. We'd have big integration nightmares. We needed to move past that. It put a lot of investment into our tooling and just making it so we went from, I think our best case, because we were when I joined, we had big monoliths, and that was taking forever to deploy. 5 to 8 hours with multiple failures and having to restart to about 5 to 15 minutes. We went from a couple really big monoliths to a bunch of microservices. We never got rid of the monoliths, but we shrunk them quite a bit, and we made them less necessary, and so we didn't have to deploy them as much. Got everything automated, got it so the developers could deploy. That removed a lot of the bottlenecks and let us ship more often, which meant we could ship smaller components. We'd ship much more fast, much more quickly. That helped a lot. It's important to think about this. I know lots of you do, but the value of this to our agile transformation, if you will, or improvement, cannot be understated. We did a very strict kind of follow the work through the product, like goes from stage to stage to stage, and found out Kanban style where all the bottlenecks were and reduced them. Another big one was test, was a big problem for us. And it wasn't that test wasn't working, it's that we just didn't have enough testers. So that was very easily remedied. Making agile who you are. In this, we talk about creating an agile culture. In this case, it was actually hire people who know agile. Like, we weren't doing that. We were hiring for technical competency before I joined. We do a little bit on culture and a lot on technical competency. We didn't actually interview people to say, like, do you know agile? Or even more so, are you interested in being and working in an agile way? So we had lots of people that we were hiring that either had really bad experiences with agile at another company, didn't like it, didn't want to do it, were convinced, as I've said, like, it doesn't work. Or we had people who'd had what they thought were very good agile experiences but really weren't. And they came in thinking what agile was something that none of you would recognize as agile. So that was an important part. We wanted people on the teams who were saying, it wouldn't be me going, when somebody says documentation isn't agile, they'd say, what are you talking about? It couldn't just be me. This helped a lot too. If you are in your company, if you're not doing this, if you're trying to work in an agile way and you're not actually interviewing towards agile proficiency or agile interest, you are making a very big mistake. Opening the process to everyone. So this is much more about transparency than bringing all of the company into the process. And eventually, we had stuff like HR started doing Kanban and finance started building Trello boards and stuff because they were exposed to the ideas, but not because we were trying to train them. We had been a company that kind of put, like, product development was kind of off doing its thing, and no one saw it. It was this weird black box. We did stuff like, we made the end of sprint demos. We brought all the teams together. So teams weren't just demoing to themselves. Teams demo to each other, and then teams demo to the company. And we made it a party. We had cupcakes, we had beer, we made it fun, so people wanted to come. And developers were really proud to show off what they'd done. In fact, like when we were doing weird infrastructure things, and it's hard, you know, that developers always tell you, it's an API, I don't know how to demo it. Well, we had a team build a skit where they were like, I am the package. I am the JSON interpreter. You know, I am the database. And it worked, you know, it was fun. It just became a fun thing. Everyone got to understand the process more. It became less scary to the rest of the company. We also started doing a lot more knowledge sharing with other companies. This is something I learned from others, actually going and visiting another company. That's great for you, for your knowledge sharing. I would bring various people from my team so that they could go and see, oh, it isn't just us that's doing these things. There's other people doing really innovative things, and we can learn from them, and this isn't just an isolated thing in our company. So, how did it work? That's, you know, all this may sound good. How did it work? It wasn't fast. This is not a quick solution to anything. This was 1.5 years or longer. It took a very long time. Partially this entire way, I'm going to set I'm just going to make sure the conditions are right for something good to happen. That's great. That takes a long time. And then for that thing to grow, takes a long time. So this isn't a fast solution. The other thing with culture change, people quit, right? People say, well, this new culture, you know, a lot of people, like I said, we had a burning platform, a lot of people wanted to change. Some people wanted very different change than where we were going, and then they said, well, this isn't what I wanted, so I'm gonna go. For the most part, that was good, because we were moving to be more agile, so a lot of people who weren't happy were people who didn't really like agile. I'm not gonna do questions, but I'll tell you after. So one of the things I will also say, though, that was less, people leaving is never a happy occasion, but some people leaving is sometimes better than having them stay. But sometimes it's not great either. The other problem I had was, because this process took long, there were a lot of people who were really invested and had worked hard before I got there, trying to create a more agile environment. Some of them left because the change was taking too long. They were hoping I was going to come in and just change everything, and they saw that the change itself was taking too long. So we lost some people that I think were well aligned to where we were going as well. So that was not the great part. On the better side, though, teams did start taking control of their process in a really good way. One team, especially as we brought in people, as we started hiring for agile interest and competency, we had a team embrace pair programming. That wasn't anything we were telling people to do or even instructing people in. They decided themselves. They, in fact, got facilities to set up a room devoted to pair programming. And that team used it all the time. We had another team doing mob programming. So they were actually iterating and improving on their own processes. Teams actually came and requested more coaching. One of the things I'd done, because agile coaching was new, it's less common in the US, it's still relatively new. Nobody had worked with an agile coach. They asked me, how do we know this is a good thing? I said, you'll know it's a good thing when I'll know it's a good thing, and you'll know it's a good thing when you tell me you're not getting enough time from the coach and you want more time. And that happened. So then I had to hire another coach because the coach was too busy. Our velocity actually increased, right, pretty significantly. One of the big problems of this burning platform is we weren't shipping anything. It was taking forever to get ideas or features out. We started moving much faster. And important for me, we started testing things more, testing ideas more. We couldn't test ideas when it took 2 days to ship. We couldn't put a feature test in, except very minimal, like call to action type tests that didn't require deployment. We actually shipped, in 2017, we shipped 300 tests, more than one per business day. And that was 3 or 4x what we'd done the year before. delivery increased. So not only were we shipping stories more often and shipping them faster, testing more features, but we were delivering more features. We started measuring team happiness at the beginning of this. We started doing a team happiness checkpoint. Team happiness increased. We did a great place to work survey. Employee happiness increased 40% in a year. So we did it every year. From 2016 to the 2017, end of 2017, people were clearly happier. And the most important aspect of this, we made more money. So one thing I think we tend to forget when we talk about Agile is Agile doesn't exist to serve itself. Agile exists to serve the company. The company pays our salaries. We need to make more money to pay our salaries and hire more people. You need to make more money. We actually substantially grew revenue as this process was unfolding. We were shipping more features to customers. We were testing those features so they were more interesting to the customers through these new practices that we were adopting and improving on. It worked. And we got to the point where we weren't doing Agile. We actually had become Agile. And that is what good Agile looks like. So, thank you.